Literally have a sign here that says question everything in my office. It's been in my office for 15 years in various offices. The reason for that is because it's critical that we are constantly looking at the decisions that we're making and the data that we have available in real time to ensure that they are still valid, and constantly pushing and prodding and poking those.
Hello, and welcome to Speaking of Supply Chain, where we explore trends, current events, and innovations impacting the logistics and supply chain industries. I'm your host, Ellen Wood. In an era where economic headwinds, tariffs, supply chain constraints, and rising costs are reshaping how companies operate, one thing has become clear: agility wins. But what does that really look like in practice? Today, we're talking with Adam Callinan, serial entrepreneur and CEO of Pentane, about the real world strategies startups are using to outmaneuver enterprises and why profitability isn't optional anymore. Welcome, Adam.
Hi, Ellen. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
I'm excited for our discussion today, too. But first, let's take a quick moment and get to know you a bit more. So, our icebreaker question for today is: what is the best thing you've bought so far this year?
Earlier this year, I bought and implemented a ski harness for a 3-year-old that had a big leash on the end of it that allowed us to get my entire family on the mountain. I live in Montana, skiing um, together for the first time ever. And it was epic. We did it a lot.
That sounds like fun. I am not good at skiing. Born and bred Hoosier here, and the state is pretty flat, so there's not a lot of opportunity for skiing. But I have gone before, and I felt wildly out of control. Like it's just falling. It's falling and slipping just on purpose. So that skiing's not my sport, but I can understand how, and I've seen the little kids on the leashes to let them go snowboarding or skiing with their family, and it's so cute. Did
Yeah,
they
it
have fun
really
at
is.
least?
Oh, yeah. Love it.
Okay.
Absolutely love it.
Let's see. The most was it the best thing? The best thing I've bought this year. I would say maybe not the best, but the most interesting thing is I started a vermiculture farm this year. And so I bought a vermiculture farm and mail ordered some worms.
What the heck is a vermiculture farm?
Okay, so vermiculture is raising worms specifically for garden purposes and to
Huh.
get the worm castings. And I'm an avid gardener, and I've never done this before where you're raising worms in buckets. And it's really interesting. My kids and I are having a lot of fun, trying to figure out the best way to do it, the best things, to feed the worms, but it's just all kitchen scraps. And I'm hoping it's going to take my garden to a next level this year, but we'll see. It's been a fun adventure so far. My 5-year-old loves that we have a bucket of worms.
That is amazing. Yeah, my kids would love that. Maybe that'll be the next time I get asked that question. I'll have a vermiculture farm.
It's fairly easy and hands off, but it is a discussion starter, that's for sure.
I bet it is. Yeah.
All right, so let's get back to our topic today, which is really the agility that supply chains need to have, and especially those smaller businesses, the startups, in order to compete in the landscape. And so, tell us a little bit about your initial startup, Bottlekeeper.
Bottlekeeper was a classic scratch your own itch product company. And it was not my itch to be scratched, it was my cousin's. My cousin Matt was drinking a beer out of a red party cup on the beach in 2012. And he's a bit of a maniac and requires that when he has a beer that it's out of a Corona bottle at a very specific temperature. And so this warm, in 5 minutes problem was a problem. And he looks around and he sees people drinking, uh, out of water bottles, just stainless steel water bottles, and has this idea of taking one of those bottles, cutting it in half, stuffing it with neoprene or like wetsuit material so that his perfectly chilled Corona bottle could fit inside of this thing, and invented this product, this sort of super koozie that keeps a beer colder for way longer than you need it to and protects the glass and makes it, it's where it's not going to explode on your foot in places where we have bare feet. And at that time, I had just sold out of a medical tech company that I was a partner in. So we decided to come together, turning a very long story into a very short story. We tested some things. I was not convinced that this would be a real product, that people would actually pay money for it. I thought it was cool and interesting, and it would end up on a shelf at Spencer's Gifts, which, for bachelor parties, which was not a company that seemed like a company to me. So we did a lot of testing. We were both very scientifically minded. We both have crazy science degrees. So the scientific method is a very valuable tool when you get into the startup and business world. So we put a bunch of tests in place over the series of months to see if we could get interest and if we could get people that weren't our moms and dads and aunts and uncles to swipe credit cards and buy the product at a real price before we spent any time or money on it. And we did that with crowdfunding. It's the perfect place to do that. Go and test concepts and make sure you have a thing before you go and invest in the thing. And that worked really well. I was like, holy cow, this is okay. People actually want it.
There is a need.
We sold a bunch of them, and before we even spent any time or money making it, so then we had to go figure out how to make it, which is a whole nother deal. But yeah, we created this product. My company before that, we had a lot of people in a lot of states, and it was big and heavy, and I vowed to not do that again. So I was very adamant with Matt that we build the company in a way that had no employees, and we did that very
Okay.
successfully for kicked that company off in 2013. In 2016, we did 8 million in sales, all direct to consumer with no employees, no investors. Super lean. It was super profitable. We grew from there into tens of millions. Ended up on Shark Tank when we were way too big to be on Shark Tank. Super fun though. And got acquired in 2021 by a private equity group called Windpoint Partners and Arctic
Mhm.
Outdoors. And there was only 4 team members. So it was really, really, really lean, really profitable, super fun.
Awesome. So, what are small startups doing today that enterprise level companies simply can't or won't do fast enough? Because when you've when you're talking about that small startup company, and you said it a couple times, it was super lean and super agile. That's not something that big enterprise company can do, but is that a differentiator? Is that a plus or is it a minus?
It is the differentiator. It is the number one value point that exists in early stage businesses is your capacity to break things and move fast and change them quickly where there aren't real consequences. Like you get to try things super fast and change your mind. And ideally, again, we're listening to the data that is telling us that the answers to the questions. That's where early stage companies do get in trouble is they end up using emotion to make decisions and not numbers and math and science to make decisions. But it is the huge lever that early stage businesses have is the capacity to move extremely fast, make decisions quickly. It's okay if it breaks. We know it's going to break. We expect it to break. It's actually part of the plan is that it breaks. And you learn from those breaks and move. And over time that develops into something.
Okay. And I can agree with that because I've worked in large companies, large corporations. I've worked in smaller, private companies. And the smaller the team, the more quickly things can get done and the more quickly you can react to a change. Unfortunately, we do have, enterprise level companies out there that are, now really having to make these adaptive changes on the fly. And it's very, very difficult for them. Um, like when resources are limited, costs are rising. This is what we're seeing in the economy today. Those startups can adapt so much faster than those larger competitors. So, what are some creative ways that you've seen either your company or smaller companies completely rewire and redo their supply chains or other cost structures that could inspire some of those larger firms or be a key learning for even larger companies?
One of the areas that I imagine this to be true in larger scale companies as well, and I actually got to see that firsthand when we did get acquired and then became part of a much larger company. One of the areas that early stage, mid stage brands get into trouble is have a tendency to solve problems with payroll. And what I mean is that you have what you think as an opportunity or a thing that needs to be fixed or a process that is broken. And we have a tendency to go and hire people that haven't some domain expertise in that thing to solve that problem. The challenge is that when that's the first line of defense against solving that problem, is that every nickel that you spend on adding that into the business adds lead weight to that company. I don't care how big the company is, big, small, it doesn't matter. It adds weight to the business. And if that weight is also not producing, if it's not productive weight, it's really difficult to recognize how the revenue in the business and how the revenue performance in the business needs to change in order to pay for that new weight, in order to cover the cost of that new weight. So in an early stage company, when it's generating $1 million a year or $100,000 a year or even $10 million a year, like little bits of weight are really, really impactful on the business. They really drag the business down. As you get into, and that's just a purely financial challenge. At Bottlekeeper, one of the things that we did really well is we first solved those problems with tech and got really, really creative with automation. And this is in the mid 2010s. Now in the
Mhm.
world of AI, like that's a whole different bag of tricks that
Right.
we're just at the very tip of. That's really interesting. But we solved that's how we got to 8 million in sales with no employees. Like I put a guardrail on the company that we are not going to hire a person until it becomes absolutely critical. So we said no to a lot of opportunity like retail expansion, like, all sorts of stuff we said no to because it violated that principle. And that allowed us to stay really, really focused on the one thing that we wanted to do was this one product to a one type of D2C customer. And we just got really good at that. And I automated everything. The customer didn't know it
Mhm.
a lot of the time because it can still be personal. It has to be personal, especially now in the world of AI. Authenticity really matters. Um, yeah, solving problems with people and humans is can be really, really damaging to a company. Yeah, particularly if you don't know how you're going to pay for it.
Well, and I think that that's something that a lot of companies are facing, especially in their supply chains right now. Anyway, I mean, we're still in trade show season right now in the logistics and supply chain industry, and it's all about automation and how can we automate these processes. The labor pool is shrinking, and people aren't looking for these types of jobs. We can't hire enough people. There just isn't enough to get the work done, and so automation has to step in, or it's too expensive to have the people, to your point, and the
Yeah.
automation is going to eventually pay for itself. um, do you find that then those limitations that you put on your business of not expanding into additional products or not going into that retail sector, did you ever question that decision of am I still really on the right track, or were you just convinced and absolutely certain that that was the way you wanted to run your business? Because no one else has a say. It's your business.
You're absolutely right. I question things constantly. I mean, I don't know if you could see this. I literally have a sign here that says question everything in my office. It's been in my office for 15 years in various offices. The reason for that is because I can only make as the operator of the business, all of us, anybody that's operating a business, operating a role in a business, you can only make a decision based on the information that's available to you then. So it's critical that we are constantly looking at the decisions that we're making in and the data that we have available in real time to ensure that they are still valid and constantly pushing and prodding and poking those. So I questioned it all the time. I didn't, you know, and then there was a point at which that question became, nope, now I am bottlenecking the company by my lack of will or desire uh, to build a team, to hire a team. And so I took a dry erase board and I literally wrote on this dry erase board. It was the end of that 2008, 2016, $8 million year. I drew on a dry erase board all the things I was doing in the company that I was responsible for and started circling the things that I should not be doing. Like I should not be running customer service. I should not be spending, I mean, at that point we were spending $2 million a year on paid ads. I should not be managing that. There's these things that there are other people that have deep domain expertise in, and bringing them in adds revenue to the business, or it allows me to go and focus on the things that can add revenue to the business. So we did that and it was like, I need to not do that. Hired a director of customer service. She started in January of 2017 and it was game changing because it freed up my time to go and do that. But we had to get to the point where the wheels were sort of falling off the wagon to uh to get there.
Well, and not just that the wheels were falling off the wagon, but that you had the momentum to push you through it. It wasn't an early in the business where you were not certain if this was a move that was going to pay off, if this was an investment that was going to have a return. So you waited until, like you said, there was no other option, but also that was one of the biggest years and it was the time to do it. Did you really focus on only staying lean within your organization? Did you utilize outside, outsourced help? You were talking about the Facebook ads or the online advertising, and there are plenty of companies out there that really focus on that. And that can certainly be a way to take advantage of those deep skill sets and have someone that is just a contracted employee for that one role. Or do you feel that it's better to have someone as part of the company that has really a stake in the game?
I think it entirely depends on the situation, which I know is a terrible answer to that question.
It's not.
For us, yeah, I mean, every situation is different. For us at the beginning, I literally did everything. Matt, we split the company in half. He was responsible for our manufacturing, our inventory, our books. I was responsible for everything on the front end of the business. So I built a website, I wrote the copy, I wrote the emails, I took the pictures, shot the videos, spent the money on paid media, did the customer service. Like I did literally everything. Now, that's not typical. I fully appreciate that. But what it did is it forced me to learn how to do those roles so that by the time I went and decided that email marketing, I should not be doing that. And I hired a contractor through a marketing agency to help take over that part of the business. By the time we did that, I knew exactly what that person needed to be doing. I knew what success looked like in that role because I ran it. I played
Mhm.
that game. And that played throughout the history of the company. Like when we went and, hired a full marketing person, I knew exactly what I needed that person to do. Customer service. When we hired a director of customer service, I knew what good looked like in that position and I knew what bringing somebody into it that I wanted to elevate that position, I had a baseline for what that meant because I ran that role. So there was a lot of value in understanding the way that the things work. When they broke, I knew how to fix them because I built them. Um, Whether or not you choose to use a third party provider is a really important and risky decision to make really early on when you're really in the startup, like figuring out your model, figuring out your revenue, and a good example of that happened at Bottlekeeper. Like at the very beginning of the company, we did the crowdfunding thing. We sold a bunch of product. We went right into a third party fulfillment provider, into a 3PL.
Mhm.
But we were literally a startup. We were doing like $1,000 a month in sales. That company, we were not a priority to that company. How could we be?
No.
We were literally
Mhm.
nobody. A third of our, like 25% of our product vanished overnight. Where'd it go? Nobody knows. 25% of our product got shipped to the wrong people. So then we had to take 25% of our product, reship it to the right people. I mean, it literally like on day one, this was in January of 2013, or 2014, we had just shipped our first orders and we were almost out of money because all of our product basically just vanished. Like that's dangerous. So early on, doing that stuff yourself when you can control it is the advice that I give true super early stage startups. And then go into that 3PL when you have a little bit of scale. Don't pick the biggest one in the country where you're a teeny tiny fish. Pick one that you fit in the middle of their pond. Um, so I think there's a time and a place to do that, to do all of those things, whether they're internal or external.
Yeah, wherever in the life cycle of the business,
Yeah.
it's going to come up. Well, and when when you left or when you sold Bottlekeeper, then you started another company, and this one is a lot different. It's certainly not bottles, so I imagine this one was a little bit more of your thought process and less of your cousin's. But it was, from what I've read, it was trying to understand where the money's going within a business and really following those pennies. We're in a volatile landscape right now. The political scene is rife with contention. It's a global issue with the tariffs, and so many businesses, small businesses and large enterprises, are struggling to figure out how they're going to maneuver and completely adapt their supply chain, their structure, their production, their distribution to work within these constraints and maintain profitability. So super volatile. What financial blind spots are out there that small businesses or even a CFO at a major firm might be looking for?
Two different problems, I think. We should talk through this because maybe I'm wrong.
Okay. Okay.
In the early stage, let's say sub 50 million in revenue.
Okay.
In that business, in the $10 million a year company, that business is already at a financial deficit in the fact that they don't generally know. There's like two silos that exist inside of a company. You have the how you spend money, how the business spends money silo, generally controlled by a CFO in bigger companies. And you have the how the business makes money silo, generally controlled by a CMO, CRO in bigger businesses.
Mhm.
In smaller companies, a lot of times that's like the same three people. the language that the CFO speaks is different than the language that the CMO speaks. Yet, what the CMO does and the decisions that they make and how they define their budgets are completely dependent on the information in the CFO role. But they don't look at the things the same because they don't understand each other's roles fully. So when you pull that down to early stage companies, they have no idea of that. They don't even know that that's a problem. So it's like they go and they hire and they don't know how their revenue needs to respond or how the return on their ad spends need to respond to pay for that person. And so they just kind of look 3 months from now, they look backwards at their P&Ls, which are now not relevant because they were from 6 weeks ago, and go, shoot, we lost money. How did that happen? And so then add into that tariffs and like moving gross margins. I mean, that is they know it's going to be a problem, but they don't know how to get to the solution. Pentane is a software product that was built from my experience at Bottlekeeper, doing all of that stuff for them. So it tells them the answers to those questions. As you get much, much bigger, a lot of times these decisions aren't just made by a singular CFO and a CMO. Like you have teams of people in these organizations, which just adds a whole nother level of complexity. So I think it's equally important that there is some connection between the information on that marketing side, how they make money side, and the CFO side, how they spend money. Because how the CFO defines an ad budget may not be based on an expense they see on a book, may not be realistic, for the CMO to be successful. And that's not because the CMO is bad at their job. It's because literally they don't have enough fuel to fuel the engine that is the business because they don't have the right information from the CFO.
I can relate to that. I can relate to that. Being a marketing manager myself, I it's all about the return on investment and making sure that the CFO is happy with the amount that we're spending. And sometimes, when you go into, online advertising, you have to spend money to make money. And I get that a lot of times the CFO doesn't feel that way, especially in a small company when they're literally counting pennies, not dollars, not millions of dollars, but pennies, just to make sure that everything, balances, that there's profit at the end of the day. So it's understandable that there would be that. I don't know that it's necessarily a miscommunication, but a misunderstanding of the different effects that money has on those roles, that the investment has on those roles, because marketing is an investment. You do have to have sales, because if you're marketing your product and you're not selling it, then you're going to go out of business very fast. But at the same time, if you have a great product and you're not marketing it effectively, you're also not going to sell it. So there is definitely a balance there where the two, as you said, the silos need to have that bridge to make that communication happen, so that both sides are working toward the same goal, which is profitability. I mean, everybody in the business has to be concerned about that. It goes from, the CEO down to the person who cleans the office at the end of the night. Everything goes into that business's profitability. So whether people are running a business in Berlin, Bangalore, or Boston, what universal truths have you seen emerge for some of these founders trying to build a profitable company when times are unpredictable like they are right now?
You know, Maybe it's the nerd in me. Profitability is a math problem. I mean, bottom line, it is. Now, what you
Yeah.
just mentioned, which is really important, not all of it, not running a business is not just a math problem. There's a lot involved in running a business, big or small, right? There's the combination of art and science that lives throughout that whole massive puzzle that is made of 1,000 pieces. Not pieces aren't all weighted the same, but that's what operating a business is like, big or small. So there are components to that that are the creative parts that are much more art than science, obviously. But at the end of the day, if we distill it down, the profitability inside of a business is just purely a math problem. And at the risk of sounding flippant, if you were losing money, the reason you were losing money is because you were spending more than you're making. It's quite literally that simple. And now the next version of that is you're spending on fixed expenses more than the contribution margin that the business is earning. And if you know what contribution margin is, you know it is inside of pretty much every business on the planet is the answer to the question, is it working or not? Growing contribution margin dollars over time means whatever you are doing is working. And as long as you're not growing your fixed expenses at the same rate as your contribution margin, that equals net profit. You are making more net profit. So I think helping at the higher stage, a CFO at a big company knows exactly what I just said. A CEO, founder of a $3 million per year business, I just spoke French to him or her. Like they don't understand that, and that's okay. That's again, that's like the whole part of Pentane as a product is to simplify that. That is the common truth to me inside of business is that most of the problems that come up and arise within profitability can be solved with math. As long as we set a destination, we pick that endpoint. We say we want to get to break even, we want to generate a 10% net margin or a 22% or whatever that is. We can use math and some really simple conditional logic to work back from that and define
Mhm.
a mathematically driven plan that doesn't rely on like slinging spaghetti against the wall, which is what an awful lot of companies do, and just hope
Yeah.
that it works, which is not obviously not a great strategy.
Yeah, hoping is not a plan.
No.
Wishing is not a plan. Not even praying is a plan. But so you're talking about, your math uh, acumen. Is what would be your most interesting or most successful customer story with Pentane and the platform? Like, where have you been able to really drive profitability for business? Can you tell us about a
Of course.
particular client or a situation?
Yeah, I'll give you an example, and it's an interesting one because it's the solution is counterintuitive, which is why again math is becomes important when we're making decisions about this stuff. There was a business that is a consumer product company selling a really high-end travel bag. The founder, brilliant product designer, and this is the way these things happen. Created a product, people started buying it, and he's like, "Great, I'm CEO." And he's the CEO of a company, but he doesn't have a heavy financial background. It's not his expertise, and that's okay. Most startup founders, early stage founders don't. That's why they eventually go and hire those people. They got to a point they were doing $2 million a year and they were completely upside down. They were losing $100,000 a month in a $2 million a year business. Um, Obviously, that's not good. You only have a couple of months, unless you have deep, deep piggy bank pockets and you love spending it. You only have a couple of months of life at that rate. So what we did, we got them into Pentane, and what it told them was two things, technically. It told them that their fixed expense basis for the size company they were was really high. Um, Important note number one. The more important note is it told them that they were underspending on their advertising by they needed to increase their ad budget by 300%. And that's
Wow.
a crazy thing. Like you see that as the founder who's losing money. And you're telling me I gotta 3x my ad spend? No way. The problem in that business, and it's a little bit different in every business, but the problem in that business is that they had their return on ad spend, their ROI was 9. That's crazy, like amazingly high. But the business wasn't driving enough revenue to drive enough contribution margin to pay for their fixed expenses. So the combination of not enough revenue and too high fixed expenses created this like perfect storm of death spiral. And so they got in the system, they got to see if we increase our ad budget by 300%, which is insane, the return on ad spend needed to get to break even will come down to like 3.5, which is much more reasonable, particularly because their products were expensive. And because they got to see that, and we got to then, they didn't just increase that 300% overnight, like that happened over the course of a month. And they got to see that happen in a controlled fashion. It completely changed the company. 3 months later, they were profitable. Now, a year and a half later, they're up 700% and profitable because it just clarified this like mess inside the company that they didn't know was there. They didn't know how to solve it. The founder of that company says that before before I mean Pentane, before the math inside of Pentane, he felt like he was walking through the forest at night, hammering, just bumping into trees nonstop.
Hope again. Yeah.
Yeah, and Pentane turned on the lights. It didn't make it so the trees aren't there, but it gave him the ability to see them coming so they could plan and strategize around them.
I think that that is a huge, huge asset for small businesses, for startups. Um, does it also provide insight for some of those medium-sized businesses that are making 100 million a year?
Yeah, that's a funny question. I've had a lot more discussions around that recently. I was always under an possibly incorrect assumption that once you got to the point, you got above 50 million in revenue ish, you generally have like a full suite of really talented people doing CMO things, doing CRO things, doing CFO things, and that would sort of inherently solve the problem. And I am learning that the problem still exists even in much larger firms like that, where you have this vacuum of data that doesn't cross in between sort of the financial side and the customer acquisition side of the business. We are focused on the smaller brand as a company just because it's where I think we can be the most helpful. And as we get bigger, we tend to see companies that want really custom things, which we can do, but they take money and time and whatever. But I do think that it is a problem that is a lot more pervasive than I had originally assumed, even in larger companies like that.
Well, that would be amazing if the tool also helps illuminate those issues within the financial structures of the business in order to help them achieve that profitability, especially now that we're facing a situation, especially here in the US, where, we're going to have to encourage those entrepreneurs to do something. We're the political situation is just making it the perfect breeding ground for these small businesses to start up, to get off the ground, because that's what the current administration wants. They want to bring that ingenuity, that innovation back to the US shores, and that's great. But we are a global economy. And while the enterprise level businesses are having to adjust things, and they have that bandwidth, they have that space, they have that size, behind them, they're still trying to be profitable too. I mean, that's an issue for them as well. But it's one of those things where, you kind of think of, rich people don't have problems, big businesses don't have problems. Well, of course they do. They're just different. They're different size, but there's still problems. And I
Yep.
think with the interest in building up the infrastructure of, smaller businesses and bringing a lot of that production onto US shores is going to, I have a feeling you're going to be really busy in the next few years helping these startups, because there's they're trying to solve a problem which is caused by, the tariffs and trade agreements that they had no control over. And
Yep.
now we're just trying to have product. We're trying to have, commerce. And to your point, these people don't know. They're the innovator. They thought of a solution to a problem and a business case to make it happen, but they're not a CEO or a CFO. They don't understand what it is that it's going to take to make that business profitable and long lasting. They're just trying to get through this year.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. I mean, the math inside of Pentane is the same whether it's for ExxonMobil or the dry cleaner down the street. So it is very universal. That challenge of early stage businesses trying to navigate that. I mean, this is actually a perfect example of the benefit of being a smaller company in Pentane. We know that that's a challenge, so I can snap my fingers and have our development team create a tool inside of our guidance system that accounts for tariffs. So they can go in and say, what happens to my company if I add 27% to my cost of goods to adjust my gross margin, and see how that impacts how they have to acquire customers and what they can afford to spend and how their conversion rates on their websites needs to change and all these things. Where it might take a big legacy SaaS company 6 months to do or a year to do something like that. I mean, we can do that in 4 days. We can move fast, break things, move quickly.
Where can our listeners find more information about this tool that you have that can help illuminate some of those issues, or even just, completely missed opportunities within their financial situation with their business?
Yeah, you can find Pentane at pentane.com, pentane.com. Me on
All
LinkedIn.
right.
That's about the only place I'm spending any time right now. So you can look for us there.
All right, we'll make sure to put those two links in the description here for all of our listeners to be able to reach out to you if this sounds like something that would help them in their current role at their current job, or with their company, or if they have an idea that they want to try to get off the ground. You might get a whole lot of interest in people just saying, "Hey, you've been there, done that. How
That'd
could
be
I
great.
make this work?"
I'm happy to help.
In a world where everything feels uncertain, from logistics to legislation, the companies that survive aren't necessarily the biggest. They're the ones that move the fastest, understand their numbers, and make the smart bets early. Thank you, Adam, for showing us what this looks like in real life. If any of our listeners have a suggestion for a topic or would like to be a guest on the show, we'd love to hear from you. You can contact us at podcast@mebach.com at any time. As always, thanks for listening to Speaking of Supply Chain. If you've enjoyed our show, please rate and review us on whatever podcast platform you prefer. We're on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Spotify. And be sure to tune in next time.